The sky was beginning to dim when Officer Daniels started his shift. The sun had not yet fully set, but the golden light was fading into a soft gray that made the streets look calmer than they truly were. He sat in his patrol car, hands on the wheel, taking a slow breath. Every shift still felt like a test to him, even though he had been on the job for more than a year. He wanted to do well. He wanted to show he could make good decisions. But sometimes that pressure made him see danger where there was none. The radio crackled with short messages from other patrol units. But most of it was routine. A quiet evening, at least for now. Daniels drove along the long stretch of road that led out of town and into a quieter neighborhood. Trees lined both sides, their leaves moving gently in the breeze. It was the kind of road where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen, yet officers were told to stay alert anyway. As Daniels drove, he noticed a dark-colored sedan ahead of him. It was moving normally at first, but then it drifted slightly toward the edge of the lane before correcting itself. It was not a big swerve, just a small slip, but it caught his attention. He watched for another moment. The car stayed straight, then drifted again, ever so lightly. Maybe the driver was tired. Maybe the driver was distracted. Maybe the person had a medical issue. Or maybe, Daniels thought, was something else. He turned on his blinker and pulled behind the car, giving himself enough distance to observe. The sedan slowed for a moment, then continued on. Daniels leaned forward, watching closely. He felt that familiar push in his chest, the urge to take action, to show he was doing his job. He tapped the button and activated his lights. The sedan pulled over smoothly to the side of the road. No sudden moves, no hesitation. That should have been the first sign to him that nothing was wrong, but his nerves were running ahead of his judgment. Daniels parked behind the car, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out. The air outside was cooler than inside the patrol car. Daniels approached the driver's side window with measured steps, just as he had been trained. The window rolled down and he found himself looking at a woman who appeared calm and collected. She looked to be in her 40s, dressed neatly in civilian clothes, her posture straight even as she sat. "Good evening." "Ma'am," Daniels said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Good evening." "Officer," she replied politely. Her voice was steady, her face relaxed. Something about her felt composed in a way that surprised him. Most drivers showed at least a hint of nervousness during a traffic stop, but not her. "I noticed your car drifting a bit in your lane," Daniels said. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, everything is fine," she said. "I'm just a little tired from a long trip. I apologize if the car wasn't perfectly steady." Her answer made sense. Her tone was respectful. But Daniels, feeling the weight of responsibility and wanting to prevent any possible risk, interpreted her calmness as something else. He thought she was trying to act normal to hide something. It wasn't true. But sometimes overthinking can turn harmless details into imagined warnings. "Can I see your license and registration, please?" he asked. "Of course," she replied. Reaching slowly toward her bag, Daniels noticed her movements were controlled. He thought her hands moved with a kind of discipline that he didn't understand. To her, it was simply habit from years of training and routine. To him, in his anxious state, it looked like she was being overly careful. She handed him her license and registration. He glanced over the documents. Her name was simple and familiar, nothing that stood out to him. She lived just outside the city. No record. Nothing unusual? "Where are you coming from?" Daniels asked. "I'm returning from a work-related trip," she said. "I've been gone for quite some time." There was something in her, tone gentle, patient, but reserved. Daniels wished he could read people better. He stood there for a moment, unsure whether he should simply give her a warning and let her go. It would have been the reasonable thing to do. But instead he said, "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to step out of the vehicle for a moment." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, not in anger, but in quiet confusion. "Is there a problem?" "I just need to ask you a few more questions outside the vehicle," Daniels said. She nodded once. "All right." She stepped out carefully, closing the door behind her. Daniels noticed the way she held her hands naturally behind her back. To her, it was just comfortable. Many people put their hands in their pockets or cross their arms. This was no different. But Daniels, unsure and trying to read signs of danger, took it as a defensive posture. Something about it made him uneasy. "Said you were tired," Daniel said, studying her face. "Have you had anything to drink today?" "No, not at all," she said without hesitation. "Just very tired. I've been traveling since early morning." Her words were steady, and Daniels believed she was telling the truth. And yet, his thoughts kept circling back to the drifting car, her controlled motions, her calmness. He felt he had to push forward. "Do you mind if I check inside your bag?" he asked. The woman looked at him calmly. "Officer, my identification is in there, along with some personal items from my trip. If you need to confirm anything, I can show you." The way she spoke clear, confident, made Daniels feel like she was guiding the conversation. He didn't like that. He felt like he was losing control of the situation. Even though nothing dangerous was happening. "Ma'am, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them," he said, his voice tightening. She raised her hands slightly, palms facing outward to show cooperation. "They're right here." She was still calm, still composed. For a moment, Daniels felt stuck between two choices. He wanted to keep things professional, but he also wanted to show he was being careful. He thought about calling for backup, but he didn't want to appear unsure. "I need to check your bag myself," he said. "I understand," she said softly, "but please handle the items carefully. They're important to me." Her gentle request, meant to be respectful, sounded to Daniels like a warning. His stress grew. He couldn't explain why. Sometimes fear works quietly in the background, shaping even simple decisions. "I'll need you to stand back," he said. She took one step back. She wasn't upset. She wasn't nervous. She was simply tired and trying to cooperate. Daniels opened her bag. Inside were travel documents, a few personal belongings, in the corner of a folder with official-looking papers. He didn't open the folder, assuming it was private work-related material. But nothing looked dangerous. He closed the bag, his thoughts scattered. He had expected to find something that justified his tension, but everything seemed normal. He turned to her. "Ma'am, can you tell me more about the trip you were on?" She hesitated for the first time. Not because she was hiding anything, but because she was exhausted and unsure how much detail she needed to give. "It was work that required a lot of responsibility," she said. "I'm still adjusting to being back home. It's been a long few months." Her answer was honest, but vague enough that Daniel's nerves tingled again. He wondered if she was avoiding specifics. "What kind of work?" he pressed. She took a slow breath. "I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just very tired. If you need proof of anything, I can get documents for you. They're in my folder." She reached subtly toward the bag, just a small motion, slow and harmless. But Daniels, already on edge, took a step forward. "Ma'am, don't reach for the bag," he said quickly. She froze mid-motion and slowly lifted her hands again. She wasn't offended, just surprised at how cautious he was being. "I was only going to show you my papers," she said. "I'll handle it," Daniels replied. Even though he didn't know what he was looking for a moment, the air felt heavy. Cars passed slowly on the opposite side of the road, their headlights brushing across the quiet scene. A couple of drivers glanced over, but didn't stop. Daniels felt stuck between doubt and determination. He didn't know the woman's background. He didn't know the weight her name carried in certain circles. He didn't know she had spent years leading teams, making life-or-death choices, earning deep respect from people who admired her, strength and calm under pressure. All he saw was a situation that he didn't fully understand. And the fear of making a mistake made him push harder instead of stepping back. He held her bag awkwardly, unsure what to do next. The quiet road stretched ahead, the sky growing darker. And the woman stood patiently, even gracefully, waiting for him to decide how he wanted to proceed. In that fading light, one thing was clear. Daniels believed he was stopping a potential risk. But in reality, he was standing before someone whose story was far bigger than he imagined. And he was about to take a step that would change the night entirely. The air along the quiet road felt heavier now, almost as if the night itself could sense that something was slowly shifting in the space between the officer and the woman. The sun had fully slipped behind the horizon, leaving a soft blue haze across the street. cars from the main part of town had become fewer and farther apart. The soft hum of insects filled the silence while Officer Daniels stood with the bag in his hands, unsure of what to do next. The woman, still calm and steady, waited for him to speak. She had already explained that she was tired. She had cooperated with every request he had made. But Daniel's nerves had tightened even more after their brief misunderstanding about her reaching for her documents. It wasn't her fault. She had moved gently, slowly, fully expecting him to see that she meant no harm. But Daniels wasn't in a place where he could read the situation clearly. His thoughts were clouded with pressure, expectation, the fear of doing something wrong, or worse, missing something important. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to step a little farther back," Daniels said, his voice low but firm. She didn't argue. She took 2 soft steps back, her posture still composed. Her hands remained visible, fingers relaxed but slightly spread, the way someone might stand during a calm conversation. There was nothing threatening about the way she moved. If anything, she seemed more patient now than she had earlier. Daniels opened the bag again, this time more carefully. Inside were the same items as before. Foldable travel clothes, grooming supplies, neatly packed snacks, and the folder that looked official. He pulled the folder out slowly. The woman watched him, not with worry, but with a tired kind of acceptance. She had nothing to hide. She had already tried to show him the documents herself. Daniels held the folder in his hands. It was simple, dark, and not decorated in any way. Just a plain folder made of sturdy material. He hesitated before opening it. Part of him felt guilty. This was clearly her private work material. Another part of him felt the pressure of responsibility. He didn't want to treat anyone unfairly, but he also didn't want to miss something that could matter. When he finally opened it, the papers inside were neatly organized. Travel confirmations, printed schedules, a list of places she had been assigned to visit. But there were also certificates, letters, and papers that carried symbols he didn't quite recognize. They looked formal, important. Some looked official in a way that made him pause. He skimmed one page, then another. His eyes brushed over sentences that hinted at leadership, coordination, large-scale responsibility. But he didn't understand enough about the field to connect the dots. He wasn't sure if these were corporate achievements, government documents, or something else entirely. The woman spoke softly. "Officer, if you need anything explained, I can clarify. But please be careful with the papers. They're important." Her voice was gentle, reminding him of someone trying to help without stepping on toes. Daniels swallowed hard. He didn't want to show uncertainty. It was one of his biggest fears as a young officer to seem unsure. Unsure meant unprepared. Unsure meant people might not trust his decisions. And so, instead of asking questions, he tried to make sense of things on his own. Even though the meaning of the documents was slipping past him, he closed the folder and placed it back into the bag. "Do you have anything else in the car that I should know about?" he asked, his voice sharper than before. The woman looked slightly taken aback, not offended but surprised. She shook her head softly. "No, just my luggage and food I picked up along the way." Daniels didn't know why her words didn't settle his nerves. He felt like he was chasing an answer that wasn't there. And the longer the silence stretched, the more he felt compelled to justify the decision to stop her in the first place. "I'm going to need you to stay right here," Daniel said. The woman nodded again. "All right." She clasped her hands in front of her, still respectful, still steady. Daniels walked to the back of her car and shined his flashlight into the rear seats. He opened the door and scanned the inside. A travel blanket, a jacket, and 2 small bags sat neatly stacked. He opened one of the bags and saw nothing more than extra clothes. He checked the trunk next. Suitcase, shoes, a travel pillow. Nothing strange, nothing suspicious. Yet the tension in his chest did not ease. Instead, something else began to grow frustration. It was the kind of frustration that comes when a person feels they've gone too far to turn around, but they haven't found anything that justifies their actions. He walked back toward her slowly, trying to think of what else he could check, what other question he could ask. "You said you were traveling for work. Why did you hesitate when I asked about it?" Daniels asked. The woman seemed to reflect for a moment before answering. Because I deal with sensitive matters sometimes, and I wasn't sure how much detail you needed. I didn't want to overwhelm you with unnecessary information. Her answer was honest. It even made sense. But to Daniels, it sounded too careful, too measured, and a part of him interpreted that as possible concealment. I'm trying to understand the situation, Daniels said. I know, she replied softly, and I respect what you're doing. You have a difficult job. I just want to get home safely. Her kindness caught him off guard. For a brief moment, his chest eased just a little. Something about her voice felt grounding, but the moment didn't last. Daniels noticed again the way she stood. Her posture strong and balanced. There was something about the way she held herself that made her seem in control of the moment, even though he was the one giving directions. It was subtle, not intentional on her part, but he felt it anyway. He took a small step closer, still gripping the bag. I'm going to have to ask you some more questions. She nodded. Go ahead. Where exactly were you traveling from? She gave him the name of the city. And why were you there? She gave a short, clean answer. Meetings. It was true, but Daniels felt like the answer was too short. What kind of meetings? He pressed again. Important ones, she replied, choosing her words carefully. But that's not unusual for my line of work. Daniels' brows tightened. His mind flickered with uncertainty again. He wanted details more than she seemed willing to give. But he also sensed she wasn't refusing. She was simply trying to be respectful without oversharing. You're being very vague, Daniels said, his voice gaining an edge. The woman let out a quiet breath. The kind someone makes when they're truly exhausted. Officer, I'm not trying to hide anything from you. I've been traveling for hours. I've had very little rest. I'm simply trying to keep my thoughts straight. If you tell me exactly what information you need, I'll try my best to explain. Her words were calm, soft, and full of patience. It should have calmed him. Instead, it made him feel as if she was guiding the conversation again. And he didn't like feeling that way. Daniel stepped back and looked toward her car, then toward his own patrol car. He felt stuck. He could call for backup. He could let her go. He could ask more questions. But every option seemed to carry weight. He didn't trust himself to make the right choice. He felt the pressure building again. He wanted to prove he wasn't missing anything. He wanted to be the officer who acted early instead of too late. And then he made a decision that didn't come from logic. It came from fear, ma'am, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm going to ask you to place your hands where I can clearly see them and stay completely still. She blinked slowly, confusion crossing her face for the first time. All right, but may I ask why? Just do as I say, Daniels replied, louder than before. A couple of cars passed by on the road, the drivers glancing over briefly. The woman did as instructed, her hands lifted slightly but calmly, her posture still gentle. Daniels moved closer. I'm going to need to make sure you don't have anything on you that could be dangerous, for your safety and mine. The woman shook her head softly. Officer, I don't have anything like that. I promise you. Keep your hands where I can see them, he repeated. The tension had grown thick now, thick enough that even the woman could feel it pressing in around them. She was still cooperating, still calm, still patient, but she could sense that something inside the officer had shifted. Daniels took a deep breath and stepped closer to her, his mind buzzing with doubt and determination mixed together. He knew he was pushing the situation further than it needed to go, but he couldn't stop now. His fear of making the wrong call had become stronger than his ability to see that nothing was wrong. The woman looked at him, her eyes steady but gentle. Officer, please, just take a moment. I assure you, I'm not a danger to you. Her words were soft, but they didn't reach him anymore. The moment was teetering, ready to tip, and in the next minutes, everything between them would change in a way Daniels could never have imagined. Please note, I will now write the full story below. This line will be replaced. The quiet road felt strangely tense, as if the air itself sensed that something was about to change. Officer Daniels stood only a few steps away from the woman, feeling the weight of his own uncertainty pressing down on him. The woman remained still, her hands raised gently, her posture calm, but clearly weary. She wasn't resisting, wasn't arguing, wasn't doing anything except cooperating. Yet Daniels couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had taken hold of him. He kept glancing around, checking the road, checking the shadows between the trees, checking the woman's hands even though they hadn't moved at all. His breathing was slow but shaky, like someone trying very hard to stay in control of a situation that didn't need controlling. "Don't move," Daniel said again, even though she was standing perfectly still. She nodded lightly. "I understand. But please, you don't need to be afraid of me." Her voice was soft, calm, and warm. It wasn't the voice of someone trying to cause trouble. It was the kind of voice someone used to comfort a frightened person. But instead of calming him, it made Daniels feel even more off balance. He wasn't used to being spoken to that way, not during a stop. Not by someone who seemed so composed. Before he could say anything else, the faint sound of a police siren approached from a distance. It wasn't loud at first, just a soft rising tone drifting through the trees. Daniels felt a mix of relief and embarrassment. He hadn't called for backup, but someone nearby must have heard his uncertain radio pause earlier, or noticed the flashing lights and checked on him. Backup meant help. Backup also meant someone would see what he had done so far. Within moments, a second patrol car pulled up behind his. The siren turned off, the lights stayed on, and the door opened. A taller officer stepped out, older, more experienced, with a steadier expression. His presence alone seemed to settle the air. "Everything all right?" The older officer called out as he approached. Daniels swallowed and straightened up. "I'm managing a situation here," he said quickly. The older officer's eyes shifted from Daniels to the woman. She was still standing calmly with her hands visible, her face patient. But when the older officer's gaze settled on her, something changed in his expression. His eyebrows lifted, his posture stiffened, and he blinked as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He walked closer, his voice dropping to a quieter, more respectful tone. "Ma'am, is that really you?" The woman gave a small nod, her tired eyes softening slightly. "Hello, it's been a long time." Daniels looked between them, confused. "Wait, you two know each other?" The older officer didn't answer at first. His mind seemed to be working fast, trying to understand what he was seeing. He turned to Daniels, his eyes suddenly sharper. "Did you check her identification?" he asked. Daniels stiffened. "I looked at her license and her documents." "No," the older officer interrupted, stepping closer. "Did you actually read them? Did you see her credentials?" Daniels blinked. He felt his chest tighten. "I saw some papers." "I didn't." The older officer exhaled through his nose, a sound filled with disbelief. "Do you even know who she is?" Daniels shook his head slowly. "She said she travels for work." The older officer looked back at the woman with a mixture of respect and concern. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry for any trouble you've been put through tonight." "It's all right," she said softly. He was doing what he believed was right. But the older officer didn't look convinced. He turned sharply to Daniels. "Take out her identification again now, and really look at it." Daniels opened the bag with shaking hands and pulled out the folder he had barely skimmed through earlier. He opened it and brought one of the documents closer to the patrol car's lights. This time, he truly looked. His eyes widened. There, printed clearly, were signs he recognized, but only faintly. Symbols used in high-level government work. Titles that weren't common. Words like service, and commendation, and leadership. And at the top, a name followed by a rank he had somehow missed earlier. Colonel. His breath caught. His fingers loosened. A sudden wave of heat spread across his face. He looked up at the woman, who was still standing patiently, offering no sign of wanting to embarrass him or confront him about what had happened. Her posture was strong and calm, the kind that came from years of being responsible for people, decisions, and tough environments. "You're a colonel?" Daniels said, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman nodded gently. "Yes. I retired recently, but I still handle some responsibilities." Daniels felt like the ground beneath him had shifted completely. He replayed the entire stop in his head, the drifting car, her calm voice, her steady answers, her controlled movements, and suddenly they all made sense in a way he hadn't understood before. The older officer stepped forward, clearly frustrated but trying to stay composed. She's a decorated officer, a leader, someone people trust with serious responsibilities. I worked under her during a disaster response mission years ago. She's one of the most respected people I've ever met. Daniel's heart felt heavy with a mix of guilt and embarrassment. He lowered the folder slowly, carefully, as if afraid to damage it. "I didn't know," he said quietly. The woman lowered her hands gently, sensing the tension changing. "It's all right. You didn't recognize me? I'm not in uniform. And you were trying to do your job." But Daniel shook his head. "I pushed you too far. I didn't listen. I thought fear can cloud judgment," she said gently. "I understand that better than you think." Her kindness made his guilt deepen, but it also kept him grounded enough to stay present. He felt his throat tighten as he tried to find the right words. The older officer stepped beside him, lowering his voice. "Daniels, you need to learn from this. You can't let fear or pressure drive your decisions. You have to see people clearly, not through your nerves. Now take a breath and let's fix this." Daniels nodded shakily. He took a step toward the woman. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for the way I handled things. I shouldn't have made assumptions. I should have listened more. I should have trusted my training instead of letting stress guide me." She gave him a small, tired smile. "Thank you for saying that. And I accept your apology. I know this job isn't easy. Everyone has moments where pressure gets to them. The important thing is what you learn from it." A quiet pause settled between them. A gentle breeze moved through the trees, brushing against the leaves. The road felt peaceful again, as if the tension had finally released, but the moment wasn't entirely over. After a long breath, the older officer said, "I need to call this in. There has to be a report. It's procedure." Daniels nodded, though his stomach tightened. He knew the situation would be reviewed. He knew he would have to answer questions. And he knew he might face consequences. But he no longer felt defensive. He felt responsible. The woman stepped forward, slightly not in defiance or frustration, but in gentle reassurance. "I won't make this harder for anyone," she said softly. "I've dealt with enough conflict in my life. Tonight was a misunderstanding. I don't want it to ruin anyone's career." The older officer looked at her with genuine gratitude. "You're always thinking of others first. That hasn't changed." She gave a tired smile. "Old habits." Daniels stared at the ground, then lifted his head. "Ma'am, may I ask, why didn't you just tell me who you were?" She thought for a moment, then answered honestly. "Because I didn't want to use my title to change the way you treated me. I wanted to be treated like any other citizen. And also, I didn't want to embarrass you." "You seem nervous already." Daniel swallowed hard. The respect he felt for her was overwhelming, almost humbling in a way he had never experienced before. "I'm truly sorry," he whispered. "I know," she replied calmly. "But now, you know more than you did before. That's how we grow." The older officer stepped aside and radioed in the situation quietly. Daniels watched him, then turned back to the woman. "Is there anything I can do to help you now? To make sure you get home safely?" She looked at him with gentle eyes. "Just treat the next person you meet with patience. That's enough." Daniels nodded slowly. The night no longer felt tense. The trees no longer felt like shadows leaning in. The road no longer felt like a stage where someone was about to make a mistake. Instead, it felt like a turning point, a moment where something heavy had lifted, making space for something better. But even though the tension had faded, the consequences of that night were only beginning. The report, the review, the questions, those would all come soon. And Daniels knew this night would stay with him for a long time, not as a moment of failure, but as the moment he learned what kind of officer he wanted to become. Please note, I will now write the full story below. This line will be replaced. It had been 2 days since the tense meeting in the chief's office, but the weight of the moment still hung heavy in the air for everyone involved. The chief had tried to smooth things over, speaking in a measured tone that balanced apology with authority. The officer had stood silently, shoulders tense, eyes lowered but alert, as if he were trying to absorb every word without letting emotion get in the way. And the colonel, composed as always, had accepted the explanation with calm dignity. But that didn't mean the matter was settled. Outside, in the daylight, life had gone back to normal. Cars moved, people walked, the world kept turning. Yet beneath that ordinary rhythm, something had shifted among the three of them. The experience had left an imprint, and each person was dealing with it in their own quiet way. The colonel had returned to her routine at the base, moving with her usual confidence. But even she wasn't entirely untouched by what had happened. She wasn't angry, not really. She knew how mistakes could unfold in seconds. She'd led missions in crowded streets overseas, dealt with confusion louder and faster than anything a quiet roadside stop could produce. She'd seen good people make bad calls because they were tired, stressed, or overwhelmed. But still, it had been strange to be on the receiving end of such a mistake back home, where she usually felt the most secure. That morning, as she walked across the training yard, she replayed the officer's face in her mind. The nervousness, the stiff posture, the way he kept his voice controlled even when he was uncertain. She had noticed those things because she had spent her life reading people under pressure. She wondered what he had been going through before approaching her that day. Back in town, the officer was doing what he always did, showing up early, checking in, preparing for a shift. But something about the past 48 hours had made him unusually quiet. His partner noticed it, but didn't ask any questions. Everyone had days like that. Days where thoughts pulled you inward and weighed down even the simplest task. He sat in his patrol car for a moment before starting it, both hands resting on the wheel. The sunlight streamed across the dashboard, highlighting dust and scratches. He stared at the faint reflection of his own eyes in the windshield. He had replayed the incident again and again. Not the mistake itself, he knew what he had done wrong. It wasn't the first time a decision had turned out differently than planned. That was part of police work. No one was perfect. But something else troubled him. It was the look in the woman's eyes when she told him who she was. Not anger. Not shock. Something more like disappointment mixed with patience. The way someone might look at a younger colleague who hadn't yet learned his lessons. He didn't want that to be the impression he left. He felt he owed her more than the quiet apology he had forced out in the chief's office. Later that afternoon, found himself driving near the base. Not on purpose. At least that's what he told himself. His route had simply curved in that direction. Or maybe he had let it without thinking. The base entrance appeared ahead, guarded by checkpoints and tall fences. He slowed down as he passed, almost subconsciously searching the area. Even though he had no reason to expect anything then, he noticed her. The colonel was outside the gate, speaking with two service members who seemed to be listening closely. She stood in uniform today, the decorations on her chest glinting softly in the sun, even from inside the patrol car. Her posture carried the presence of someone used to being in command. He hesitated, hands tightening on the wheel. He could keep driving, pretend he hadn't seen her, pretend everything was resolved, but something in him nudged forward. A quiet voice, the kind that shows up only when someone is trying to grow, whispered that he shouldn't walk away from the moment, so he pulled over. He stepped out, heart beating a little faster than usual, not because he feared confrontation, but because he didn't want to disturb her or make things worse. There were moments in life where pride had to be set aside. He knew this was one. She noticed him as he approached, and the service members standing with her stepped back politely. The colonel looked at him with a calm expression, clearly surprised but not displeased. For a second, neither of them knew who should speak first. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I didn't mean to interrupt." She nodded once. "You're not interrupting." He took a breath. "I just wanted to say, I'm still thinking about the other day, and I wanted you to know it won't happen again." Her expression softened. "I believe you," she said. Those 3 words eased a bit of the tension he had been carrying. She continued, "You're out here doing a hard job. Mistakes happen. What matters is how you learn from them." He nodded, grateful for her steady tone. They stood in silence for a brief moment, but it wasn't awkward. It was more like an understanding settling between them. Then she asked, "How long have you been on the force?" 6 years, he answered. "Still learning every day, though." "That's a good sign," she said with a faint smile. "People who think they know everything stop growing." Her words landed deeply. He glanced down, then back up at her. "Can I ask something?" "You didn't have to be so patient with me." "Why were you?" She tilted her head slightly, as if considering whether to share more. "Because I've been in moments like yours," she said. "Moments where I had to make quick decisions with limited information. And sometimes I got it wrong, too." Honesty surprised him. He had imagined her as someone who rarely made mistakes, someone far above ordinary errors. Hearing she wasn't perfect made her seem even more admirable. She continued, "When people corrected me, I appreciated the ones who did it with respect, not judgment. So I try to do the same." He took in her words and exhaled slowly. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Really." The colonel nodded once more. "Take care out there," gave a small nod back, then turned to walk toward his car. But before he had taken more than 3 steps, she called out, "Officer!" He turned. "You did the right thing by coming," she said. That simple sentence stayed with him long after he drove away. Days passed. The routine of life settled again, but something had changed for both of them. The officer worked with renewed focus, taking extra care in each interaction. He wasn't perfect, not even close, but he was trying, and that effort carried weight. The colonel, on her end, found herself thinking more about the community outside the base. She realized how disconnected many service members were from the people living just beyond the fences. Most interactions were quick, official, or limited. Maybe there was room for something different. One afternoon, while sitting in her office reviewing training reports, the colonel paused. Her mind wandered back to the conversation with the officer at the gate. She reached for her phone the next day. Flyers appeared around town, nothing dramatic. Just simple signs announcing a community safety event hosted jointly by the base and the local police department. The goal was to build trust, understanding, and communication between civilians, officers, and service members. The officer noticed one of the flyers taped inside the department lobby. At first, he stared at it without realizing he was smiling. His partner nudged him. "You going to that thing?" "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I think I should." On the day of the event, families gathered in the open field near the base. Children played near tables with small activities. Officers and soldiers stood side by side, answering questions, giving demonstrations, and simply talking with people. The officer arrived early, nervous for reasons he couldn't fully explain. But when he saw the colonel coordinating volunteers with her usual effortless command, he felt grounded. She noticed him too and walked over. "Glad you made it," she said. He nodded. "Thanks for putting this together. It was overdue," she replied. People understand each other better when they talk face to face. Throughout the afternoon, they worked together, guiding visitors, answering questions, stepping in where help was needed. As they interacted, something unexpected happened. Laughter slipped in. Conversations felt natural. What had begun as a tense and unfortunate incident had evolved into something meaningful. Near the end of the event, as the sun dipped low and families started heading home, the officer looked around at the crowd. "This turned out pretty great," he said. The colonel folded her arms, watching the scene with a satisfied nod. "It did, and it's only the beginning." He turned to her. "You think there'll be more events like this?" "I hope so," she replied. "If we keep building trust, little by little, this town will be safer and more connected than ever." He liked the sound of that. As the event wrapped up, the officer and the colonel stood side by side watching the last families leave. Neither spoke for a moment. It wasn't necessary. The quiet felt comfortable. Finally, the colonel said, "Funny how one mistake can lead to something better." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it really can." What neither of them realized was that their story wasn't finished yet. Something else was about to happen. Something that would test the trust they had started to build, and when it came, they would face it together, whether they expected to or not. The morning of the incident began quietly, the way calm days often do before something unexpected changes everything. The officer had finished his early patrol and was heading back toward the station, humming softly to himself, lost in thought. Ever since the community event, he felt lighter in some ways, more grounded in others. Working with the colonel had opened his eyes to how much stronger things could be when people trusted one another. The sun was still low, glowing warm across the rooftops and pavement. People were walking dogs, picking up morning coffee, and moving through their routines. It was the kind of day that made the world seem gentle, but peace has a way of shifting in an instant. As he drove past the small grocery store on the corner, something caught his eye. A man standing beside a car, his posture tense and uneasy. He wasn't doing anything wrong, at least not at first glance. But something about the way he kept scanning the street made. The officer slowed down. He glanced again. The man's shoulders were shaking slightly. His hands trembled as he fiddled with something near the trunk. His face looked strained, worried, maybe even frightened. The officer pulled to the side of the road. He stepped out of his car slowly, not wanting to alarm him. "Everything all right?" he called out, keeping his tone calm. The man startled, looking up with wide eyes. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he exhaled shakily, almost in relief. "The car. It won't start. I'm supposed to get to the base. My sister works there. She called me this morning. I think something's wrong." The man wasn't aggressive or threatening, just deeply unsettled. "What's going on with your sister?" the officer asked. The man looked around again before answering. "She sounded scared. She told me not to tell anyone, but I didn't know what else to do. She said the base was on temporary alert for some reason. Something happened inside." The officer felt his chest tighten. An alert on the base. It wasn't public, not yet. If it were serious, the department would have been informed. Before he could ask more, a distant sound made both of them turn the sharp. Echoing tone of alarms in the direction of the base, the officer immediately reached for his radio, but before he could speak, dispatch came through first. "All units, be aware, the military base is experiencing a security situation. Stand by for instructions. Maintain distance unless requested." K. His pulse quickened. A security situation. He didn't know what was happening. But one thing cut through every thought. The colonel was there. He thanked the man quickly and instructed him to stay near the car until the situation became clearer. Then he got back into his patrol car and turned toward the base. He wasn't going to intrude. He knew better, but he couldn't sit still, not when someone he respected was inside. As he approached, the entrance came into view. Trucks were positioned at angles, creating barriers. Soldiers moved with urgency, guiding people away, securing the perimeter, giving orders. The officer pulled over a safe distance away. He got out, keeping his hands visible, and waited. After a moment, one of the soldiers recognized him from the community event and approached. "You shouldn't be too close," the soldier said. "We're managing it." "I understand," the officer replied. "But is the colonel all right?" The soldier hesitated. "She's coordinating everything inside." He nodded, relieved but still anxious. Just then, as if the day wanted to pull his heart in two directions, a sound broke through the air, a loud horn. Followed by the screech of tires, up the road, a small van swerved wildly, clipping a parked car before skidding across the asphalt. It came to a stop only a few feet from a group of civilians who had gathered near a bus stop. The officer sprinted toward them. The driver, a middle-aged worker wearing a uniform, leaned forward against the steering wheel. His breathing was shallow, his face pale, sweat dripping down his temples. "Sir," the officer said, tapping on the window. "Are you all right?" The man looked up weakly. I can't feel my arm." The officer's instincts sharpened. He checked the pulse, fast, irregular, a medical emergency. He opened the door carefully and helped the man lean back. Civilians stepped away from the damaged car nearby, murmuring nervously, "Someone call an ambulance." The officer shouted, "I already did." A woman nearby replied. The officer stayed with the driver, speaking calmly, supporting him while waiting for paramedics. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Life didn't always create big scenes. Sometimes it was small moments that mattered most. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, stabilized the man, and took him away. The officer spoke with the bystanders to make sure everyone was unharmed. He didn't know it yet, but someone had been watching him from the base gate. The colonel had stepped outside briefly to assess the perimeter. She spotted the small commotion in the distance, saw the officer helping the injured man with steady patience. Even with everything happening inside, the sight of him working so calmly grounded her. She watched as he directed people away from danger, reassured the frightened driver, and stayed present in the moment. For a leader who spent her life evaluating character, it told her everything she needed to know. A few minutes later, the internal situation was brought under control. It had turned out to be a false alarm triggered by a malfunctioning sensor and unusual movement in a storage area. No danger. No harm. Just a moment of confusion, handled with efficiency. When the colonel finally walked toward the officer, he turned and straightened instinctively. Everything all right in there? He asked. Yes, she said. Thankfully, he nodded with relief. I saw what you did, she added. His brows lifted slightly. At the car, she nodded. You handled it well, he shrugged softly. Just doing my job. No, she said. You were doing more than that. You stayed calm, you reassured people, and you didn't hesitate to help. That's leadership. He looked away for a second, embarrassed but grateful. She continued, It's easy to focus on mistakes, but it's just as important to recognize growth. They stood quietly for a moment as a warm breeze brushed across the road. Then the colonel said, You know, when all this started, we barely understood each other. He nodded. Yeah, feels like a long time ago. And now, she added, I feel like the community is stronger because of it. Me too, he said. She looked out toward the town. I've been thinking. The event we held shouldn't be the last. There's so much good that comes from people learning about each other, talking to each other, seeing each other as humans. He smiled. If you need help organizing the next one, I'm in. I'll remember that, she said. Another quiet settled between them, warm, easy. Then she turned to him with a thoughtful look. What you did today, helping that man, keeping everyone calm, that matters just as much as anything that happened on base. People notice those things. He nodded slowly. I hope so. They do, she replied, as the afternoon sun climbed higher. They walked a short distance toward the road together before stopping at their vehicles. Take care out there, she said. You too. Ma'am. She gave him a final nod before heading back to the base. As he watched her go, he realized something. The story that began with a mistake had turned into something completely different, something built on respect, shared responsibility, and quiet, steady growth. Not dramatic. Not flashy, just two people doing their best in a world that needed more of that, and he knew, without needing to say it out loud, that this was only the beginning of a better future for both their communities. Sometimes a bad call doesn't end with regret. Sometimes it opens a new door, and that was exactly what had happened here.